Tonight, before you fall asleep, your brain is going to do something strange. It's going to remind you that you're going to die. Not now, not soon, maybe, but eventually. And instead of sitting with that thought, you will probably reach for your phone. That is a completely modern response to a very ancient problem. But in feudal Japan, the most feared warriors on earth found a different answer. They did not look away from death. They walked towards it. They studied it. They rehearsed it every single morning before they ate breakfast. And the rule they lived by did not make them reckless. It made them free. The rule is called Hagakure. The word translates roughly as hidden in the leaves. It is a collection of thoughts dictated by a samurai named Yamamoto Tsunetomo in the early 1700s. Tsunetomo had served a lord named Nabeshima Mitsushige for most of his life. When Mitsushige died in 1700, Tsunetomo wanted to follow him in death, as samurai traditions sometimes demanded. But in practice of ritual suicide following one's lord had been officially banned, Tsunetomo instead became a monk and spent the rest of his years in a forest hut, dictating his philosophy to a younger samurai named Tsurumoto Tashiro. What came out of those conversations was one of the most radical documents in human history. The opening line does not ease you in. It tells you exactly where you stand. The way of the samurai is found in death. Tsunetomo wrote that a samurai who is not resolved to die at any moment will hesitate at the wrong moment. And in the chaos of battle, hesitation is the gap through which death enters. Now, this sounds a bit extreme, but it sounds like something a person would say to sound tough. Now, Tsunetomo was not writing poetry. He was solving a psychological problem that modern researchers are only now starting to understand at the level of neuroscience. The problem is your brain hates uncertainty more than it hates bad outcomes. Psychologist Ari Kruglansky at the University of Maryland spent decades studying what he called the need for cognitive closure. His research showed that when human beings face open-ended, unresolved threats, the anxiety they produce is more destabilizing than the threat itself. The unknown is harder to function inside the known, even when the known thing is terrible. Death is the ultimate open-ended threat. It is coming. You do not know when. You do not know how. And your brain, which evolved to solve problems and plan for the future, cannot model it. So it does what it always does with unsolved problems. It suppresses. It deflects. It pushes the question into a corner and hopes you never look there. But the samurai looked there every single day. Tsunetomo described a practice so simple it sounds almost trivial. Each morning, before anything else, the samurai was to meditate on the various forms of his own death. He was to imagine being cut down by an arrow, killed by a sword, swept away by flood, burned in fire, struck by lightning. He was to walk through each image slowly, fully, until his own death felt as ordinary and familiar as the smell of morning rice. The Japanese term for this practice is shikan. It means one pointed focus. And what it was doing inside the samurai's nervous system was something that modern therapy has reinvented under a different name. Psychologist Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, identified the phenomenon he called learned helplessness. When a creature repeatedly encounters a threat it cannot control, it eventually stops trying to respond at all. It freezes, it goes passive. The threat becomes too large, too overwhelming, and the mind shuts down its own problem-solving capacity to protect itself. Fear of death for most people operates exactly this way, because you never fully confront it, never sit with it, never let it become concrete. It stays enormous. It stays abstract. and enormous abstract threats are the ones that produce the most paralysis. The Hagakure practice worked in the opposite direction, by imagining death until it became familiar. The samurai was essentially doing exposure therapy on himself 800 years before the clinical model was invented. He was shrinking the monster by looking at it every single day until it became just another object in the room. And something unexpected happened when the monster shrank. Clarity arrived. If you know you're going to die and you have accepted it completely, that it no longer produces panic, the question your brain naturally asks next changes entirely. It stops asking, how do I avoid death? It starts asking, what do I do with the time I have before it comes? Tsunetomo described this shift in a way that modern readers often find disarming. He said that a person who has resolved to die becomes light. That is the word he used, light. Not fearless in the way we usually imagine a warrior. Cold, hard, and incapable of feeling. But light in the way that a person becomes when they are no longer carrying the weight of an unresolved question. Researcher Sheldon Solomon at Skidmore College spent 30 years developing what he and his colleagues called terror management theory. The research showed something counterintuitive. When people are subtly reminded of their own mortality, they do not become more reflective. They become more defensive. They cling harder to their worldviews. They become more hostile to people who threaten those worldviews. They perform harder for approval. They spend more money on status symbols. Death anxiety, when it's unprocessed, does not make you wise. It makes you reactive. It makes you smaller. But the Hagakure tradition pointed towards something different, not suppression of death anxiety, not unconscious reaction to it, full absorption and digestion of it. When the samurai found that other side of that digestion was not nihilism, it was not the sense that nothing matters. It was the opposite. When you know the ending, the middle becomes precious in a way it was not before. Consider what this meant in practice. A samurai who had fully accepted his death did not flinch when his lord gave him a dangerous assignment, not because he did not value his life, but because he had already made peace with losing it. That peace was not weakness, it was precision. He could focus entirely on doing the task well, because he was not simultaneously managing a secret internal argument about his own survival. In modern terms, you might recognize this as the psychological state that most of us know as the flow state, the complete absorption in an activity when the self temporarily disappears and only the task remains. Researchers found that when people describe their deepest moments of engagement, creativity, and meaning as moments when they forgot to be afraid, when the future collapsed into the present, when there was only this thing and the doing of it. The samurai was engineering that state deliberately, every morning before anyone else was awake. Now you might think this philosophy would produce soldiers who were reckless, men who charged into arrows because they did not care whether they lived or died. But Tsunetomo was adamant that this was not the point. He wrote extensively about the importance of skill, preparation, loyalty, and restraint. A samurai who accepted death was not trying to die. He was trying to serve. The acceptance of death removed the obstacle to full commitment. It did not replace the commitment with indifference. There is a useful distinction to draw here. Modern psychology separates what researchers call mortality salience from what they call post-traumatic growth. Mortality salience is the unconscious low-level awareness of death that Solomon's research showed makes people defensive and reactive. Post-traumatic growth is what happens when people have survived near-death experiences or terminal diagnosis, report becoming more present, more grateful, more willing to take risks that matter. and less interested in risks that don't. The samurai practice was neither of these. It was something more deliberate than the unconscious salience, and more controlled than the chaos of trauma. It was structured confrontation, a daily appointment with the most frightening fact of human existence, conducted before breakfast in stillness until the fact became something you could not hold without dropping. Tsunotomo also wrote about loyalty in a way that is deeply connected to this. He believed that a samurai's relationship to his lord was more important than his relationship to his own life. This is often dismissed as blind obedience or feudal ideology, but there is psychological structure beneath it worth understanding. When you have accepted your own death, the question of what you would die for becomes the most important question you can ask. It forces you to locate what you actually value, not what you say you value, not what you perform valuing in front of other people, what you would actually give your life for if the moment came. Most people never ask the question with any seriousness, because most people are still trying to avoid the premise. The samurai asked it every morning. Here's something worth sitting with. You are going to finish this video and go back to your life. You will probably check your messages, you will think about dinner, or work, or someone you worried about, and somewhere in the background, very quietly, the fact of your own death will be waiting in the corner where you left it. The Hagakure does not ask you to become a samurai, does not ask you to romanticize violence or feudal hierarchy, or any of the specific cultural structures that surrounded this philosophy in the 17th century Japan. But it does ask a question that has no expiration date. What would change about the way you are living right now if you sat with the fact of your death until it became ordinary? What would you stop tolerating? What would you stop postponing? What argument would you let go because suddenly the argument is so small against the backdrop of the time you actually have? The samurai did not find peace by solving death. They found it by stopping the fight against the knowledge of it. They looked at the ending until the ending stopped running the middle. Tonight, when your brain offers you that quiet reminder before sleep, you have a choice. You can reach for your phone, or you can stay with it for 10 seconds, just 10. Not to spiral, not to catastrophize, just to look at it the way a samurai looked at it every morning until it was no longer something to look away from. That was the rule. Not a battle cry, not a death wish, just 10 seconds of honesty about the one fact that makes all the other facts matter.